theme song for the Gear Podcast. Uncle Leon, we are joined by some more Australians today, mate. How you feeling?
We are. I'm feeling really, really good. We have Simon and Sam from Pirate MIDI today. How are you, boys?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Good, thank you.
Covering the width and breadth of this great nation of ours. This sunburnt country of ours.
I don't know if the listeners can put up with having four Australians talking over the top of each other. How's this going to go?
Mate, it's
going to be a
wild
wild
ride. People going to
ride.
be able to understand us at this point?
Well, the most important thing is we have our first Tasmanian on the podcast today. So how do you feel about the footy team coming in, Simon?
2028?
Pretty mental. Also, I lived in New South Wales for a little bit, so when you say footy team...
No, we mean the real footy team.
Sam doesn't. Yeah, exactly. I was going to say Sam doesn't know what you're even talking about. This is AFL we're talking about here, Sam.
Disgusting. No, AFL's fine, but I'm a league tragic through and through.
I mean,
you know what's ridiculous? Back to AFL. What's ridiculous is that 20% of the population were members of the footy team within the first 24 hours.
Including
ridiculous.
Leon's parents.
Yeah, my parents got around that. They were like,
nice.
my dad's a Collingwood tragic, but he's originally from New South Wales, so he was a Western Suburbs Magpies guy, and obviously they merged, and he swore them off and was like, right, I live in WA now. Well, who's the black and white team? Collingwood. And I was like, man, what's wrong with you? So, but he's happy because they're the reigning premiers. So, but yeah, they were like, oh, how good's this? Because you could become like a member for $5 or something like that.
I think it was $20 for a family or something. Yeah, I think it was 20. But anyway,
it's basically what a great free PR push, right?
Oh yeah,
that is kind of on the same lines as they talk about a big game or something. It's like every seat was sold out and this and that, and 24 hours before they're giving out tickets for free for all the unsold, unclaimed ones. They're like, how good's this?
Yeah, exactly. So that's very, very interesting. Now, Sam, you're in Newcastle. Simon, you said you lived in New South Wales. How did you guys have the mental idea to make MIDI controllers in Australia?
Well, this is an interesting story
This is a very funny story.
Well, you would think that being the person who first started selling MIDI controllers out of the two of us, that I was actually competent, but that's not the case. I got into software synths using MainStage 3 on my Mac, and very soon after, I was pushing my mate, who's a guitarist, to use MainStage for his guitar rig at church because it was super loud in the room, his amp, and I was just like, we could solve a whole lot of problems by going direct and using emulation. I was like, pushing him.
Yep.
But you got to have that foot control, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I started building MIDI controllers with Arduinos. And I thought, oh, this is an interesting little gap in the market for a small, cheap MIDI controller that does this kind of thing for people who are running tracks through Ableton or just wanting to use one of those apps with their iPad or Mac or whatever. And so I bought a bunch of Arduinos and aluminium enclosures from Alibaba and some 3PDT switches with the little LED ring around them.
Nice.
Where all good DIY projects start.
Exactly.
Yep, exactly. And I smashed out 50 of these things in my garage and sold them for $70 online and sold them all. And so I did another 50. And then Sam came along correcting me in a Facebook group one day and we became friends. And we got amongst it.
Awesome.
My wife likes to sort of joke about, this all started due to just being unable to just not correct someone chronically. My family we all fall into the, kind of corrections on top of corrections, and which is fine until, it's like family board game night and it's just a nightmare.
A bit of an actually.
Just a bit of a, just a bit of a, you're wrong, and I'm going to let you know, even if I am myself maybe uninformed.
To be fair, if I remember correctly, it wasn't a very brutal one. It was just some guy asking, "Hey, you should put Bluetooth in this." I was like, "I have no idea." And Sam just chimed in and said, "You could do it really easily with this," and just dropped a link. And I was like, "Okay, that's not going to happen."
Can I just interject?
I ended up DMing him.
I just want to interject for 2 seconds because Leon doesn't know this, but completely unrelated to us talking to you today. The last 3 days, all I've been doing is looking at Arduinos and trying to work out how to make, and honestly, completely unrelated, trying to work out how I can make a little MIDI controller for my desktop to control switch, just some MIDI switching stuff. So it's very fortuitous that we are here right now. And that you mentioned the Alibaba Arduinos, because I've sort of looked around. Is that cool? Is that stuff fine? Does it make any difference if you go buy one from JCar or you go buy one from there?
Sam and I have split opinions on the quality of Alibaba, but I tend to start with the cheap stuff and see if it works. And Sam would rather generally go the more tried and true method.
But I'll interject. First of all, I don't know what the kosher thing to do with, you're talking about companies in a stream. I personally am fairly anti-JCar unless I have to. They kind of clone someone's idea and they're marked as their own, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it depends on what you're doing, right? So if you want to build something for yourself, but it might be easy just to go down to the local, if you can get one locally, you go do that versus getting something online, 100%. Because if something goes wrong and it's only for you, and you've got, kind of a knockoff like Arduino clone or something like that, all well and good. Where I think you want to be careful is as soon as you start getting into any kind of, business or personal standing leaning on a product, you need to have some sort of traceability, some sort of line back to something other than just some rando, $3.49 free shipping comes in 2 months AliExpress listing.
I mean,
it just depends on your use case.
No, absolutely.
Yes.
The other reason I mentioned JCar is that I think I could drive 10 minutes down the road and pick one up right now, or I could order one online. And they're like $40 at JCar or like $10 I can get one over East. So I just didn't know if there was an actual and I'm just gonna learn how to do some stuff. That's my use case. It doesn't matter. But I think I feel like I was burnt years ago buying cheap knockoff stuff and then there being like one component that meant that things wouldn't talk to each other. So I'm always conscious of that in this sort of context. But yeah.
One good thing about, say Arduinos is a lot of them are, your knockoff is to a set of, specifications or whatnot. You buy an Arduino Nano, say, for example, and it's pretty much going to be exactly what you get because it's an open source design. There's nothing magical, really anyone could build one in the garage if they wanted to. I guess the big thing is, say, if you are involved in the open source community, you go and buy a genuine Arduino board, then that contributes to the Arduino project. How you might feel about, whether you're pro Arduino or anti Arduino is an entirely separate conversation. But it's, the $40 for, say, a genuine Arduino board at a local store is very expensive and not necessarily a good way to go. But it sort of it depends on your outlook on that.
Yeah, understand.
Much like really anything.
Yeah, that's super interesting. So we haven't even talked about, what you guys, I mentioned obviously the company name and how you guys started. How quickly did you sort of realize, hey, there's a market for something that's, maybe a little more slick, a little more, let's say, pro that you could buy in stores? Because obviously you guys, for anyone who is unaware, tell us about the products you currently make and then how you went from this making 100 DIYs to what you're doing now where you're manufacturing these.
Well, I suppose one of the interesting things is that that niche that I found of the really cheap MIDI controller with 6 switches and just some LEDs morphed into something that's a lot closer to some of the more high-end products as we just realized you got to make something that's usable, and MIDI is fundamentally quite basic and also a lot of people trip up on it in a lot of ways. So adding in more features, more UI, such as a screen. We didn't have a screen at first, then we started with this tiny 0.9 inch screen, and then we found the big boy and Sam was like, Simon, you got to see this. And just adding that, it just improves it. And so basically we wanted to make a great MIDI controller, not just the cheapest MIDI controller.
Right.
Because the idea was, well, at least from where I came, it was like trying to convince people to get on board with this, making it easier to do, like getting rid of those hurdles. And so
I guess as well, you've got two value propositions there. And I feel like with guitar synthesizer gear at the moment and the culture around it, everyone is looking for these like sweet spots of value where you might have something that is incredibly cheap, but it performs enough functions where you're like, you know what, that's actually an amazing deal for the money. And then the other value proposition is like, what is the best? And in terms of functions, in terms of usability, in terms of UI, in terms of just, you know, doing its job. And MIDI is one of those things where, you know, when Troy and I were getting into playing guitar, you know, we liked old rack gear, and you know, this was the era of you either had a multi-effects or you had a few Boss pedals. But it was like, hey, we found this secret where if you get a bunch of rack processors and this thing called MIDI, you can change it all at the same time. And you know, I had this old ADA MIDI controller that was like, you know, about 3 feet long, and it only sent program changes. Not that I knew what that was, but you could press one button and multiple things would change. To now where like I teach kids who have these gigantic pedal boards and they've kind of put everything themselves, like, oh, I've got this and I've got this MIDI interchange, and then this goes, you know, this one has 5 pin, but this doesn't. It's sort of the acceptability has flourished in the last decade, maybe more.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely has. And the funny thing is that I didn't even necessarily... Simon, you know, talking about that ease of use with MIDI, he was probably a lot more altruistic in terms of his goals at first. You know, we kind of met, and I had... you know, like we didn't have any kids back then, you know, a bit more free time. It was great.
I remember those days.
Yeah, exactly. Or maybe I first was... Anyway, and... I said, "Oh yeah, it's kind of a cool project. I'll let me help you with this." And we kind of just got designing. It was just a bit of a passion project. And you know, Simon's talking about his goal was, you know, making MIDI easy for people and this and that. And it certainly is a core, I guess, driver and principle of Pirate MIDI, our brand. But I was probably more along the lines of, let's just build something really cool. And that's sort of the engineer side of. Yeah, okay. But let's just design something that's really cool and see what happens. So two different perspectives coming out, and we kind of collided, and then you know, probably about 12 months after we started working on it properly and formed a business together, we then launched our Kickstarter.
Cool.
Oh, okay, that's right. You guys did the Kickstarter thing, right?
Yeah. We did a Kickstarter starting in December and finishing like on New Year's Day or something.
All right.
Possibly
we decided
one of the worst times.
We decided it'd be a great time to start a hardware electronics manufacturing business. And
December
it was
2020.
terrible. It was such a terrible time to do it. It was,
Yeah. Not great.
That's a whole nother thing.
So, yeah. You remember that buzzword chip shortage?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was us. We didn't cause the shortage, but we were definitely in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Because I remember... do you guys sell the Witty Jacks? Or
we did them as an add-on with that Kickstarter campaign because they were brand new. So we got to sell them as some of the first people to distribute them, which was really, really awesome.
Yeah, because
we still do if you want to get one in Australia.
Yeah, well, I ordered one of you guys about 2 years ago, I reckon it was. And I think that's the first, maybe it would have been the first time I saw you guys or saw the name around. Nice. But yeah, it was, I vaguely remember the Kickstarter, like around that sort of time, because I think I was looking at MIDI controls quite a lot around that sort of time. So, I wasn't sure exactly what date it was, but the chip shortage thing, that was, I guess people are still feeling it now, right? Like,
let's just set that aside.
Oh, sorry, Leon.
No, I was just going to say, we can set that aside if you don't want to talk through the trauma.
Oh, no, by all means. And so statistically, December is, I think it's the worst. You have to correct me on that, Simon.
It's like January to March is the worst, and so we picked the one right before that.
January, March, December's not much better. And we thought, cool. It was like, you know, it was... we had no idea what we were doing. It was the first kind of product I'd brought to market. And I remember maybe 3-4 months before we launched it, so I was working on it. I caught up someone, I was like, hey, I think we need to move on this. And in hindsight, we definitely weren't ready, but we need to move on it because otherwise I can see us, going back and forwards between this chip's available, that chip's available. What are we going to do? We're still designing the thing, but it felt like we'd never get it launched if we didn't just take that step off the deep end. And it was a deep end. And, we thought, cool, well, it should take us maybe 4 months, 5, maybe 5 to get these things out there. It ended up taking us a year. And that was frustrating for people who, were waiting on it 100%. It was frustrating for us. It was frustrating for everyone. And it was sort of just one of those, there wasn't much more that we could do because so much time and energy was being spent into just trying to source parts and make sure we could,
And you weren't alone in that because there was a lot of products which launched around the start of 2020. And one thing that I did notice with what you guys are doing was the direct line of communication with your customers is pretty amazing. They're how transparent you guys are. Where obviously you've got your Discord and you sort of, as things come in, there's regular development updates. And for me, obviously being someone who keeps up to date with what's going on with a lot of gear and trawling around on forums, that's definitely not standard, but it feels like something that should be in the industry, where there was a lot of other products which came out around the same time where they were like, oh, we're going to have all these amazing features and, just stay tuned. And, 4 years later, they still haven't rolled those features out. And, they might put out a blog post which is like, hey, guess what? We're going to have an update for you all on the next release soon. That's the monthly update. And you're like, yeah, that's kind of, it's something. But yeah, I definitely admire the way you guys were sort of like, hey, here's where we're at. And this is what we're dealing with. And we understand that people would have liked to have had their controllers a week ago, a month ago, 6 months ago, but this is the climate we're in.
Yeah, and I will say we definitely didn't get, and we obviously still don't, but we didn't get everything right in that regards. We always wanted to build around a really good community and build that, and that was kind of a core focus for us. But, for example, so our controllers shipped in, I think, November 2021.
December,
the editor for it, which has been out for a while now, that actually didn't launch until I think maybe 10 months after that, when our goal was to have it available at launch, and we'd sort of promoted it. And the reality was that we'd actually spent most of 2020 working on the editor and gotten it pretty close, and working with this app developer overseas that we felt like we had a kind of a good working relationship. And we won't go into what happened, but things fell apart and we had to pivot. And we had sunk a bunch of kind of money into that direction, and then basically had to start from scratch. Unfortunately, sort of through a friend of mine, we'd got a local developer, in sort of Newcastle, and he does a great job, and he's been killing it for us. Yeah, it was really good. But we basically started from scratch at that point, and people are saying, I ordered this with the editor. Where's it coming? It's like, we know, and the best we can tell you is we're working on it, and I get that it's frustrating. And now you look back on it and you think, wow, what a wild time to do anything. How did anyone get anything done? But it was just, it was that, or you kind of hide under a blanket for 3 years and wait for the world to go by and then try and come out of it and do something. Yeah. So we're very, very grateful and appreciative to everyone who kind of stuck with us through that. It has and did mean a lot.
Yeah. I mean, like Sam mentioned, we didn't really know what we were doing in terms of business. We'd never really run anything at this scale at all. And so there's a lot of supply chain stuff that people just know, but we didn't have anyone in our ear telling you, hey, just so you know, supply chain stuff from the East, you got to know this, and this. So there's a lot of learning on the fly. But also, I think we were inspired, particularly in the way that we engaged with our community, our customers, etc., by the fact that people are you don't hear about anything for a long time, and then suddenly there's a new product. Yeah, so just I think there's sort of probably coming out of the DIY and open source worlds and forums and things. There's a bit of that collaborative approach that's definitely baked into how we operate and create, and also wanting to make an awesome product that people actually want to buy. When you're a nobody, it has to be like an awesome product, right? You can't just tell somebody that they need to pay $200 for this thing that's not as good.
And we didn't have a couple of $100,000 of VC backing either to do some epic, marketing campaign or throw around our weight to get our parts. We pretty much we self-funded and by the skin of our teeth. So really the only thing you have to fall back on then is saying, okay, cool, well, we have to provide really good customer support, no matter how much we might not feel like it at the time, or this or that, or you might, because it's one of the key ways you can differentiate yourself without having, that large marketing and all of that sort of stuff.
Which I appreciate as someone who likes stuff, there's, and especially things that can be, MIDI is straightforward and it's a standard and it's been around for a long time, but man, it still trips me up every now and then. And sometimes you just you need that line of like, okay, if I can just email someone and they can tell me exactly what to do and they can get back to me in less than a week, I'll probably be happy. But what I would like to say is tell us about the bridge, the MIDI controllers you're making at the moment. And just because obviously a lot of people may or may not have been aware of what you're doing, and, what does it do that other products weren't doing? And what I'm always interested in how, companies take on community feedback and roll that into deliverable updates. So just tell us all about the bridge.
Yeah, cool. If you're not familiar, I've got one here now. This is a kind of development unit that I have, so it doesn't have a back on it, for example. So that, while I'm testing new things, it just makes life easy. But yeah, this is our Bridge 6. I'll try and get some of that glare off. So it's sort of our current flagship MIDI controller. Obviously it has 6 foot switches. It has some ports, and it's got an OLED screen, which really not much else sort of has, which we felt was particularly important for, you're playing at a pub or a dark room or whatever, or just at home, alone, or you're recording something. So say like, Troy, with your lighting setup there, something that I've always just found could be so off-putting is you look down at your pedal board and you've just got this kind of, the backlight LCD, and it feels like you're looking up at like, the first Game Boy that had a backlight in there, just this block of light.
There's so many guitar pedals that I have to put my thumb over the LED when I move the thing because it's too bright and I can't see anything. Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's I don't normally sit in the dark this much, but I've got this window that's so comfortable to sit in, but it looks terrible on the camera, so I've got to close them up, and now I feel like I'm in this deep dark dungeon.
I reckon it looks great. I was going to say as well, the marketing stuff, people go to your website, you've managed to make a MIDI controller look pretty darn sexy, which is for something that is so utilitarian. It's the screen looks great, and the form factor as well. It's not this like, I grew up being like, oh, MIDI controllers are these things you put in front of refrigerator-sized racks, and they're the size of like, everyone had that friend whose parents had the extra freezer in the laundry with the the top that comes up. That was like the old MIDI controllers, right?
Yes. Yeah, it was. And a lot of the design, I feel like we kind of stumbled on it by accident. So a really defining part, which I haven't really seen in any other MIDI controller or pedal or anything else, is the way that we handle kind of switch feedback, so in the form of these LEDs. So there's actually 2 separate full color LEDs per foot switch, and you get sort of a primary and a secondary LED, we call them, and that allows you to have like your regular toggle where you turn your switch sort of toggle on, toggle off, and then maybe you might, as a secondary function, have when you hold it, you get access to a second toggle, or you might want to target that remotely or something like that. So you sort of get 2 for the price of 1 in some ways.
And you guys also have like ramping, and you can hold the switch and set all like the kind of advanced stuff as well, right? Yeah, that's
and that came about. I remember being in front of my computer and I said to someone like, hey, I kind of like this curve for a thing. What do you think? It was like, yeah, okay. We didn't even really know if the project had legs or not at that point. And I was like, well,
and it didn't have a screen, so the LEDs were important. That came off the DIY thing. They were the switches with the LED ring around them, and the LED feedback, being able to send MIDI from the app to keep the red green in sync. Like that's sort of how we started with the LEDs.
And it was sort of like that Monty Python and the Holy Grail skit. It's like, what's better than one LED? More LEDs, So
Exactly.
I thought, well, there's room for two. We put them in there, and I'll sort of figure out what they're used for later.
Yeah, I remember that.
There's a bit of, well, we'll have to. At worst case, it just gives more of a uniform brightness. I don't know. We'll kick that can down the road a little bit.
That's amazing.
And it probably, I think, turned out to be sort of a pretty happy accident in that regard. But I remember when we launched too, there was, I can understand it. People are very loyal to their brand and things like that. One thing we try and discourage is just the concept of being a fanboy or a fan or whatever else, fangirl, cover all the bases of any particular brands to the point where you become blinded by a like of that brand to anything else that on an otherwise level playing field might be considered. And so when we came out, we had quite a few kind of community members who said, oh, it looks really similar to the MC6. That's kind of putting, using nice language. And trying to convey where it's like, yeah, okay, fair enough. I can see that, 6 switches in 2 rows. But when you boil, if you said, all right, put 6 switches in a box as a MIDI controller, can't be too big, has to be reasonably spaced. You would say, well, unless you do 1 strip, you've got 2 rows. Then they need to be spaced well enough so that you can comfortably get to the switch. Okay. Then if you've got a screen, there needs to be some amount of spacing in between them. Then it's going to be in an enclosure. Now, most anodizers, black is the easiest color for them to get to. And we didn't have thousands of dollars to get custom inks and dyes made up. So they got anodized black. And when you anodize black, you get like a silvery white font. And if you follow that rabbit hole all the way down...
Convergent evolution, right? It's like that thing where...
100%. 100%.
I was watching something the other day where they were like, things keep evolving into crabs. It was like all these different things that look like... They all look like crabs, but they're not. It's like, and that's like MIDI controllers. It's such a utility. Like, all right, claws are kind of handy. If you have one, then maybe a slightly bigger one and legs. And as you were saying, of course, there's going to be the superficial similarities.
Exactly. And we've got a few things, in the pipeline that, kind of branch away from that, initial concept for, in a really cool way. But that's kind of just the way it evolved. But when you're this small company, and this is something that I had to learn, I'm not sure about Simon. Simon's always been a little bit more kind of the level-headed, the calm approach, and I tend to sort of be a bit more like, woo, woo, woo. Is you can't engage in every single conversation, try and just tell people it's like, hey, you're wrong, and you shout them down, and here's why, and this and that, because no one wants to listen to you. No one's ever had their mind changed by someone kind of just, ranting at them.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of that, you're just trying to ride that wave and kind of not say anything, and it's really hard, and I didn't always get that right. But especially as a small business, you can't go and spend marketing dollars on some push to get your message out there. You've just got to hope that the product stands on its own 2 legs. And I think that's where we are now. We've just released version 2 firmware, and it is sort of at the point now where it's like, I would happily give that to anyone and say, hey, explore this, get to know it, get to use it. And I think you'll agree that it's a really, really great mature piece of gear, which is a nice place to be in now after, getting to that point.
And from the end of 2020 to we're recording in June 2024, so 3.5 years. That's quite rapid to go from 0 to hero.
Yeah, and I think as well, it's just Simon and I. There's a misconception. I love when we get an email through our support line and they say, hello.
Team.
Yeah, hi team. Could you put me in touch with your customer support department? And it's kind of like, this is your customer support. Like on one hand, your customer support department is me checking my work emails on my phone at like 9 o'clock on a Sunday night while I binge watch season 2 of Modern Family for the 14th time. So first of all, but second of all, that person emailing is also then speaking to me, who no one else designs, the circuit board layout, designed the form factor, wrote, any of the firmware. That's all sort of been me, and that has its trade-offs. We're a lot slower to develop products because of that. Hopefully we'll that'll change at some point, but it has its pros and cons. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Just quickly, what were you both doing before this, like work-wise? Because I don't know if we really covered that.
I'm a emergency nurse, registered nurse.
Oh, it's basically the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly,
Yeah.
same thing. Entrepreneur, emergency nurse, same thing. So, Yep. So basically, COVID, I was like, I've worked in brutal emergency departments before. I know what's going to happen in this. This is not just a local hospital bed block crisis. This is a national crisis. So I was like, how about I switch to 1 day a fortnight and I spend the next year typing in MIDI commands from the backs of user manuals into a Google Sheet. So that's what I did while Sam prototyped the Bridge 6, and then we got our device library.
Yeah. Yeah, I was always an odd job. So actually, I worked in like education electronics. So I worked for a local business, and I was sort of would create content written articles and videos, handle customer support for like maker electronics, and then also a lot of like schools and education and stuff like that. And then I decided to kind of leave that and sort of formalize a lot of my experience through uni, going there, a bit later than everyone else, and I'd barista at a couple of cafes, and then do sort of some freelance consulting work and whatnot. So, and then I still do that. Like I work on Pirate MIDI. There's another startup that we're working on with a local guy that we're going to be launching soon, and then I also do freelance engineering and consulting for projects, typically in the music and the MIDI kind of sphere, because that's probably where my expertise lies, in embedded engineering. That's
awesome. That sounds like he's a good friend of ours now, Jason Tong from Headfirst Amps, he's doing his own amps full time. But speaking to him, he, was sort of when designing, he's got an amp called the Alta. So it's like the ultimate modern Marshall, but everything's MIDI switchable. So he had he's kind of pulling from different things that he's done over the years, different types of expertise. And, you get to that sort of point where, it probably doesn't feel like a unique skill set, but it actually is a very unique skill set where you're good at multiple things, and you've got if you've been in education as well, you're used to not having to just like, okay, I have the technical know-how, but I have no way to communicate this to anyone who doesn't have a PhD.
100%. And I think so. Simon touched on something really interesting before when you were talking about entering MIDI commands into a spreadsheet, and that was something that we had from the beginning, which is our device library, we call it. And it's basically a catalog of all MIDI commands of every device we can possibly find. I think I would hesitate to say we've got all of them, but it's like the Dettol 99.99% of MIDI controllers, and the exception is things like your H9, where the user actually has to go and assign the MIDI command, because there's no defaults. There's nothing you can enter.
That's cool, and also so handy because I look at a lot of old rack gears. So the manuals are 50% how to use the thing, 50% MIDI implementation. So, and most of the manuals are up online. So sometimes, and it's not in any way standardized. You'll have the same company. It's like, here's our second gen product.
Boss, looking at you. Love you guys, but honestly,
we hate Boss's MIDI stuff.
I obviously love Boss, and I have friends who work there, but there 100%. Are things where you're just like, man, in 1984, like the rack reverb that you had that has MIDI, you're doing the same things on your like flagship multi-effects processor. 40 years later, like things have changed.
The word consistent is probably one word that you can give to Boss, right?
Yes.
Love their gear, but I would hesitate to say that 50% of our customer support things where someone is like, I can't get this gear to work, it's with like their RC looper or whatever it is.
I've got an RC 500. And I've gone very deep in trying to make that do anything. It's been fun. Like, I won't go too deep into it. My live little pedal board is pretty reliant on a lot of MIDI stuff happening, and it's been fun between that and an HX Stomp, trying to get things to talk to each other. And I go down these rabbit holes like Weedy Jacks, I can do this now. I can have all my songs on song, and then just bam, 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 set MIDI commands. Like as soon as I load up a song, that's going to be so much easier. It's just So
but it is amazing.
Imagine that. Imagine the rabbit hole brain But suddenly you have manufacturing capabilities.
Yeah.
And you have a laser cutter, 3D printer. You can order circuit boards to arrive at your house in days. That's Sam. That's that guy.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask as well, because I was reading it might have been on Discord or something, or a blog you guys put up. I'm really interested in the stuff you had to buy to make these things versus just ordering stuff, like part pickers. Because I read the whole thing about that, and just basically, to use a sport analogy, you go on I don't know, a team gets absolutely pumped, right? And
Playing
20
AFL,
years ago,
like the Australia's number one
AFL
sport.
cricket,
Go on.
whatever it is,
Allegedly, not true.
And 20 years ago, to just be like, the coach would be like, we were pathetic, not good enough. And now they come out and they're like, look, not the result we wanted, but there was a lot of learnings. And they always use this phrase, learnings. It's like modern, guys with severe brain injuries have learnt this word to say.
They've all been training the house down this week.
They've been a lot of learnings to pull out from this. We didn't score at all. In fact, 50% of the team got injured, but a lot of learnings. So what were the learnings out of this? I'm really curious to know, because you're not in the Midwest. You're not in Europe. Like, manufacturing in Australia, it's always one of those things, especially, the government's like, we need more manufacturing in Australia, but it's hard, right?
Yeah. Sorry, just a quick one.
Yeah.
I have a 2.5-year-old son, and if he ever gets to, 22, 23 years old, and he's like, Dad, I'm going to start hardware manufacturing, I'm going to say to him, this is what I'll say to him: don't do it until you have $100,000 cash or more. Like, that's honestly, it's been our cash flow is big, especially for the R&D, the upfront. You're not getting any sales for a long time, potentially, when you're making a tech product. So that was a big one, just like the budget to play around and get things right through lots of iterations instead of making tons of changes and then making the order. That was a good learnings, wasn't it, Sam?
Yes. It's a good question, Leon.
It's a huge question.
I can talk as literal or as much about this, but so we actually manufacture our, if anyone's not familiar, we assemble our PCBs. So you have a bare circuit board that gets components placed onto it and soldered, and out comes kind of, all of those. Most modern products use surface mount technology. So, a big machine with some kind of robot fingers, pneumatic suction heads, come along, pick those parts up, place them on your board that has, kind of like so it's a solder paste on it, and it goes into an oven and, melts the solder, and out comes a finished board. That's the abridged version. So we wanted to manufacture as much of our products in Australia as possible. And we started out, we said, well, realistically, we're probably going to get the boards done overseas in say, like Shenzhen, because that's their bread and butter. It's what they're fantastic at. The enclosures, we should be able to get those done in Australia. We went to a Sydney place, got some samples, and then he sort of realised how nitpicky we were. It's like, hey, we really need this hole to be kind of, relative to, where we've set the origin, maybe like just 0.25 of mil tolerance. Is that okay? And, these guys like cut and fold sheet metal, they make like racking for Woolworths or Coles or whatnot. They make big things, and as soon as you come into them, it's this really tiny fiddly thing where it's really important that this angle is. So for example, you can see the angle of an enclosure. It's like, hey, it needs to be 96.4 degrees. Thank you. It was a struggle. So our first batch for our Kickstarters actually were done in Australia. We've recently flipped that, and our circuit boards were done overseas. A big part of the part shortage was how difficult it was to get contract manufacturing. So you say, hey, here's my design files, my bill of materials for this circuit board. I would like, 100, 500, 1,000 of them, whatever. Thank you very much. Is the turnaround time for that was a lot longer. The cost was significantly higher. We had to buy parts 6 to 9 months ahead of time. So you're dropping thousands and thousands of dollars on just, a big lot of one part, paying another $1,000 to send it over to them, insured. And you insure it, but if it gets lost in the mail, you can't buy more anyway. So the kind of the insurance payout from the postal service is going to do you no good. And you have that process, and it it became apparent that this was going to be really difficult. And for better or for worse, we made the decision to manufacture, to do that assembly in-house. Now, in hindsight, we're now sort of, 2.5 years on from when we made that decision. In hindsight, it was probably quite a bad, knowing everything that I know now, I might have thought twice about it, because I knew what I was getting into, more or less, and jumped in anyway. And it's been fantastic as an engineer to really, you understand the whole process around start to finish of designing, electronics or a product. But I would have a very stern conversation with anyone who wanted advice to kind of follow down that path. But, we have the equipment, we are manufacturing it now, and it's taken, most of that time to get a relatively smooth process. But, there we are. But it's a very different time now. And if you were starting, I'll say if you're starting, a hardware, electronics-based brand and you want to build a product, low number, kind of fast turnaround contract manufacturing is a beautiful thing. You should leverage it and use it. We are where we are now, and it works well for us, but it was through a lot of pain, a lot of really long nights.
Yep.
But I mean, also is the flip side of that. I have this, with say like guitar pedals, right?
Yep.
There's obviously a massive difference between someone who's an enthusiast who gets into building pedals and they do everything themselves. They make, the weird bleep bloop machine, and everyone loves it, and it becomes the cool thing. That's the state
of guitar pedals lately.
That is the state of guitar pedals, right? And they sort of get to that point where they're like, well, okay, it would be a lot easier if I had a few employees. That obviously just changes everything, because if you're doing stuff yourself and it's your business, the idea of, working 18 hours a day to meet an order so that your business doesn't go bust, most people would probably be able to justify that. But as soon as you have employees, you literally legally can't do that to them. So it comes to the point where it's like, hey, you know what we have to do is build a tube screamer, because everyone wants a tube screamer, and that will pay the employees' wages, and then we can build the next bleep bloop machine. So do you guys, the point I'm making is, do you guys feel any of the pressure there, where now that you've got the manufacturing side set up, that it's like, hey, what's the thing that's a license to print money? What's something really stock and boring that we know people will do? Or are you actively like, no, we need to stay focused on cool stuff that we like?
Yeah, I will add too that once you have employees, you can no longer just decide, this big, heavy bit of wood, I'm just kind of like going to perch it up there somewhat precariously. And if it falls, it'll only injure me. No worries. That really sharp, exposed metal edge, it's only me. There's that too. Good question. We, there was a kind of a lot of downtime when you're waiting on, samples or things like that to come back. And my brain, the way that I work, is very just, what's the new hot thing I can kind of hyper focus on for a couple of months and just design and get a prototype on, and then sort of have the next thing there, on my bench. So I've got a whole bench full of kind of product ideas that are in that first draft stage and work well enough but need some polish. And we've got some, I don't know. There's some things where I feel like maybe it is along that, more product to the masses type vibe. But I guess you only really know that, we're not going to turn around and make an analog tube screamer, say, without MIDI control or whatnot, as an example.
Imagine that. Stevie Ray Vaughan didn't use this MIDI controlled tube screamer.
Hey, it would kind of be sick though, right? Imagine. I'm just putting it out there. You could, but then, you could probably also have, one person who I have spoken to a bit, who literally makes that product, is Lockie at Polyeffects out of Melbourne. Yes. And, great guy, so many interesting ideas. And sort of when I met Lockie at the start of 2020, funnily enough, was literally working out of a tiny space, hand making the Bebos themselves, and it's been really cool to see. It's like, hey, now we bought a giant machine that does this, and we've got another machine, and the Flat 5 pedal, which is they manufacture their own. It's not a touch screen, but it's a touch interface. It's like, it's really the sort of thing you can only do, I guess. Like, you couldn't go, let's find somewhere in Shenzhen that manufactures this, because it's coming out of his brain as a fully
100%.
formed thing, and then he's getting it done. So yeah, that's. I mean,
Don't look too closely at the background, I will point out. I don't think you can see anything lying, but kind of over there, there's some new stuff in sort of the R&D
That's exciting.
works that isn't quite ready for the light of day. But, Simon, I haven't run this by you. Should we maybe...
Do it, yeah.
We can
100%.
show off.
Oh, of course we do.
yeah.
Do you want to be the first people to see like a new product we got coming out?
This
Yep.
is
Screen goes
insanely
blank.
fun.
No.
Let's go.
This was not rehearsed.
Just good audio description for the audio-only listeners.
Yes.
Yes. So we got our Bridge 6. I've had this in mind for a couple of years, and it came out of, we had heaps of people saying, you're going to make your own, triple 3 aux switch, and I'm there going like, it's 3 switches, a couple of diodes in a box, and people make them for like $40. There's no margin or joy or happiness to be gained
Or competition even. Like, what do you offer?
from making those. You're always going to get beaten by some guy, in his garage who just likes burning his fingers on soldering irons, right? So I thought, well, okay, what could we do to make our own thing that had a good value proposition to people? And we came up with this. So this is the Aero.
All right.
Yeah, so it's a obviously slimline single kind of row of foot switches. It's an aux switch. Mm-hmm. So if we kind of cover that up, there's just your TRS jack as an aux switch, which can plug into our flexi ports, can plug into other gear when it's not powered on. It's a standard passive aux switch. It's also a fully baked MIDI controller in its own right, sort of fully standalone. Yeah, so you plug it in. Power or USB, where are my fingers? USB, there it's hard to do mirrored. You also get a fully full fat MIDI controller. It actually runs the same firmware based Bridge OS as our Bridge 6 and Bridge 4. So you get, sequential foot switches, you get all of that kind of beautiful things, 2 flexi ports so you can plug in expression pedals, you can have different MIDI out modes. Mm-hmm. You could connect the aux switch out into a flexi port in aux switch mode and have an infinite chain of these if you so wanted to, but it's really, really thin, really small, really low form factor, and is designed to fit perfectly in front of your Bridge 6 or your whatever.
Well, I was going to say,
coupled out front of your board.
Same with as an HX stomp or something like that too, or a Strymon pedal, or
it's pretty much bang on an HX stomp. Yeah.
Well, it's also perfect designed such that that angle of the enclosure, exactly lines up with the Bridge 6. So if you put them kind of at the right spacing, you get a perfect planar surface. Just little things like that, where it's like.
I mean, again, that's the difference between just we'll just put out an exact Tube Screamer clone and like, hey, let's actually do something that can do all those basics, but maybe it's elegant. It elegantly solves a few other problems.
Yeah. One of the cool things I like for the simple bit of it is you could just set those LED colors and power it if you have spare power on your pedal board and still just use it as an aux switch, but also it's set up to toggle colors on and off and you're not using the MIDI side of it at all. But you just power it and you got a toggle on and off LEDs on your aux switch. But yeah, it has those RGB LEDs again,
and it's perfect, right? Because you got one on your board. Maybe you need to redo your board for a gig where you don't need MIDI, and then maybe you pick up a gig where you do. It's got that's really cool. That's cool.
I love it.
I'm actually really glad you mentioned that because I've just grabbed like a USB lead, and so you power it on, and you can kind of have toggle states on your switches and so on and so forth. You can assign the colors customly however you want, but that was actually a big part of the idea where for a lot of people getting into MIDI is really daunting, and it's this great abyss, right? And I think it's a really cool product where it's like we haven't announced pricing yet, but it'll be a good chunk cheaper than say like a Bridge 6. And you can pick it up and say, hey, you want to control your bank up, bank down on your HX stomp or your timeline or whatever it might be. It's going to be a little bit more than just a standard passive aux switch, but not by tons. It's not going to break the bank. And then when you're ready to explore, it's also got all of that MIDI functionality and control. You can have the aux switch port plugged into a separate pedal that might not even have MIDI functionality, but it has an aux switch input. Then you can have, your flexi ports as MIDI out to other MIDI gear. You can do all of that really cool stuff.
That's
and
awesome.
You're not spending twice. You don't have to then, I've got this useless bit of thing. And like, I hate manufactured e-waste. I hate things that are designed to be single purpose. And so when you've got this and it's like,
100%.
It's this stepping stone into this gets you where you need to go.
It's so small.
Also,
and cute.
how sick would a mega board be with 4 of those across the front? I mean,
Well, you can chain them together. So
Put in like
away you
a. I was going to say, like a fishing rod case, maybe. Do they have those? They probably don't, do they?
a tackle
Pool
box.
cues?
Tackle
Pool
box.
cues, they unscrew
Yeah.
those, don't they?
Hey,
So,
we
like,
laugh,
yeah,
but
that's already a thing.
you know, someone is watching this going, I'm going to order 4 immediately. And I mean, even just, here's the thing. It's like a deconstructed MIDI controller if you had some of them, right? Because you could have, the thing is with like modern boards, right? It's like the MIDI controller has to all be in one place, but maybe the way your board is, you've got your big sky over on the left and you need a few extra things, but over on the right, you've got, I don't know, a drive pedal or something that's got some aux switches. You can have them talking to each other. Yeah, that's really, really cool.
100%. So we've got device link, which is, you connect with these flexi ports. They let you do like, expression input.
Tell us about the flexi ports, because that's obviously a kind of unique feature on the bridge as well.
Yeah, so to my knowledge, they have more functionality than any of the sort of other kind of all-in-one ports on anything else. I haven't sort of explored the engineering side of every other product, but there's some really cool things you can do. One thing allows you to do bi-directional MIDI control with a single port as well.
Okay.
So you can use it with we're working on like compatibility for say some of the Strymon pedals where they've just got the single port. You can do like dual expression in or dual control voltage inputs. You can also have that bi-directional MIDI, so you can connect 2 bridges together and have them talk to each other. And you set it up and you can have it so you press a switch on one bridge. You don't have to set up any special MIDI commands, and it maybe toggles 4 of them other on your board. So you can have 2 MIDI controllers on 2 boards. When you just want one, it works fully standalone. When you use them together, it automatically banks. You set one as the main and one as the satellite, and the main will send the bank name to the satellite so they show the same like song name. But then when they're disconnected, it doesn't overwrite your presets. It reverts back to its single function. So you could have this on your smaller board where you just want the single functionality, connect it via device link to your main board or whatever, and away you go.
That's so clever. Now, with all this MIDI stuff, I do want to segue. As you said, it is kind of a bit of an abyss getting into it, and it's you still see people where it's like too hard, too hard. Why would I do that? So, Simon, you've actually written a book, about all of this. That kind of, and I've been fortunate enough to kind of read through it. That's how we, I guess, teed this up. Please tell us about it and tell us where people can get it. And
sure.
It's fairly obvious what the motivation is, but how did you approach it?
Yeah, so it's called Tones and Technology. Subtitle is Mastering MIDI-Controlled Effects Pedal Boards. And it actually came out of, I'll preface this by saying I did write it, but it came out of a conversation I had with my friend Chad GPT. I was just working on some SEO stuff, looking at maybe writing some blog articles and just getting some ideas on what I could write. And then this pop-up for this plugin I was using was like, you could write a book using ChatGPT. So I actually got the horrendously uneducated Chad to write the chapter layout of this book, of just like the topics. And I was like, well, first of all, most of them were rubbish. It was hallucinating all over the place.
Yep.
But it just gave me this idea. What it did for me is it just put these ideas, just these single sentence ideas in an order. And I was like, that's a really cool idea, just having like an all-in-one place. I know some people way prefer reading over watching YouTube videos, and especially considering if you want to learn a lot about MIDI, there's not really a one-stop shop. You got to watch a lot of different YouTubers and a lot of different videos. So I was like, this is a cool idea. And it would also take a lot off the plate of Sam and I to not have to be troubleshooting basic MIDI, like is your MIDI channel set correctly? Like to take those emails off our plate is a huge win for us. So basically, I just spent 8 months of my spare time in evenings just chipping away at writing a couple of thousand words at a time. And yeah, basically I just went, right, what is all the stuff? Now I've had like 3 years of customer support experience with people who are new to MIDI. And so that was really helpful in just going, all right, where should we start? And as we cover those foundational basics of like what a MIDI channel does, just throw in there the things that you definitely don't do with a MIDI channel. Just so, cut it off at the pass, head it off right from the get-go. And so the other thing is you don't get MIDI resources in written form at all, written for effects. And it's a pretty new thing. And like you say, heaps of people are getting into it. People are interested in MIDI. Like someone spends $500-600 on a Chase Bliss pedal. They know it has MIDI, but a lot of people are never going to get that extra functionality out of this expensive pedal just because they sort of don't really understand what it could do. So yeah,
which from our perspective is kind of like buying a, say an overdrive pedal or whatnot and never touching, that tone knob or whatnot. It's like
that's right.
You're using 2/3 of the features.
Yeah. So it starts off with just a short introduction about history of effects pedals, goes into short history of MIDI, and then like the foundations of what MIDI is, how it works, interspersed with all those trip ups, and that second chapter, the introduction to MIDI, ends with how MIDI is generally done for guitar pedals specifically, or effects pedals. And so from there, we talk about how to choose a MIDI controller, what sort of size you might need, what sort of features you might need based on what you want to do. And then it goes into like simple to advanced techniques of all the different kinds of stuff you can do with MIDI, walking through it in a pretty conversational tone, lots of space for notes in the margins, lots of diagrams that I drew by hand to help people understand it. And yeah, hopefully it's just all in one place that people can refer to as they dive into MIDI from beginning to even a bit more advanced.
It reminded me a little bit of, I don't know if you guys have ever read the manuals that Mesa Boogie do for their gear. Where
no, I haven't.
It's I mean, going back to the 90s, that was the first one I read. And, it's one of those things like you're not allowed to be conversational in a manual.
Right.
But their manuals are very like, they kind of step you through, and they'd always have these things where it's like, it's time to take a break and go and play some guitar now. So they'd explain, they'd maybe explain how the channels work and how to set stuff up. And it's like, cool, we're just putting a break in here because you should actually go and kind of try this. So I enjoyed that with the ebook, where it's sort of, the history part of it's up front, and you can kind of skim that. Or you can read it deeply if you're really interested in that, but then
it depends
you sort
if
of
you
get
know
into the
about
main
it or
action.
not.
Yeah.
And basically, because the progression, you can skip the first 3 chapters if you already know what you're up to, but there's definitely some nuggets in there.
There's a lot of depth in there for sure.
I really can check that out. Like I've gone down that rabbit hole so many times, and I continue to go down it. Yeah, I really can check it out.
Nice.
I do like things.
One thing.
You forget what's at the bottom. You keep going.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you just keep going. I do like things where I can learn a little bit and then go back and reread and maybe learn something else as well.
Yeah. One of the things also is that you can... Oh, far out. I've just completely lost my train of thought. Oh, good.
Well, why do that, Simon?
Seconds.
One thing that I think's really good about it is it's very evergreen content, so to say that how MIDI works isn't going to change unless we move over to some new protocol. The content that you're learning, it's very one-time effort expenditure. You're not learning that, and then when a new pedal comes out or in a year's time, it's going to be completely different. And that is probably quite contrary to, say, the manuals that we put together for our devices, where they talk about, okay, well, here's basically in the current state of firmware, here's how everything works, and here's how you can do what you need to do. But as the product evolves and the firmware develops, that might change. Probably not too much in a lot of it, but maybe some things. And you can sort of read the book and say, cool, I have a really good understanding of how MIDI works, and now all I need to do is learn the kind of the top layer of this MIDI controller and what buttons I need to click or what I need to do to get where I want to go, rather than you're trying to learn both sides of it at the same time and nothing's making sense.
Yeah.
I also think... Sorry, Simon, you go.
I'll go, because I could lose it again. But all I was going to say is that the book is very specifically not a Pirate MIDI marketing tool. It is very open with like what kind of MIDI controllers you might need. We list tons of other brands, sort of break them up into mini MIDI controllers, medium size, large, all in ones with the loop switches built in, all that. So yeah, it's definitely completely useful for anyone who might not ever have the intention of buying a Pirate MIDI product.
That's really cool, and we'll put a link in the description of this video and this episode as well, so that people can check it out and get maybe a bit of a discount on there as well.
100%, 100%. 20% off discount for the listeners. Yep.
I'll put the code right here so people can check it out.
It's about
there. You go.
That'll look really good in post.
Yeah, exactly. Especially because I'll forget to do it.
Yeah.
No, that's really, really interesting. So without giving too much away, what are the sort of short to medium term plans for you guys going forward with the company?
I might interject here. Speaking of things, and on the topic of, kind of like book promo, everything else. Last thing about the error, I promise.
Yes.
If you have a bridge controller, in version 2.0 that just came out, there's a bit of an Easter egg hunt in there. We talked about the clue in our live stream we did 2 weeks ago. We're going to post it up now for everyone available who hasn't checked that out on our Facebook. But there's a bit of a puzzle in there, and if you you solve it, there's a cool thing built in that you will probably want to explore. And if you do the cool thing, which is going to be cool forever, but if you do the cool thing the first time, you will get a discount code when we launch this. You'll actually get a discount if you kind of step through and solve the puzzle, which hopefully everyone can. We'll kind of give some more
up down AB.
Exactly, yeah, and then you get
hot coffee.
It's basically paintball mode for GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. That's
diehard GoldenEye fan.
We're all
man.
on.
I feel.
Yeah, I had a PlayStation back then. It was birthday parties were hard. Mario Kart, bad at that. Super Smash Brothers, bad at that. GoldenEye, bad at that. Anyway,
I'll throw down to Mario Kart anytime.
I'm good at.
There's a local pub actually that has machines and just
really?
Yeah, so good. Yeah,
you are. That's cool. You're a bit of a weapon on the Mario Kart on the Switch, Troy.
Oh, I'm getting there now, man, but it's taken some time. It's taken 30 years. 25
30 years of investment.
Impressive given the Switch came out like 6 years ago.
Well, yeah. But like going back to Mario Kart 64, man, I could
Mario Kart.
Oh, man, I couldn't turn a corner. I didn't realize you could power slide back then. And then
I set the record at my local. Remember when Harvey Normans would just have a console set up?
Yeah.
In them?
Yes.
Yeah, I just the greatest Mario Kart run I ever did in my life. I was waiting for my mum to buy a microwave when I was 11 or 12. I just sat there and I just put this this god tier run in where it was so fast. And so you remember you could race the ghost of the fastest thing? That was me I went back a few times and it was still the best time. And then you couldn't enter your name, but I was that was me as Yoshi, just power sliding the whole way around and getting the boost.
Do you know what Harvey Norman it is? Maybe shout out for the eternal record at that.
The eternal record at Joondalup Harvey Norman. So sorry that no one could beat that one-off run.
You know what's hard now is because it's my son's 5th birthday today, actually. But we've been playing Switch. I've been playing Mario Kart with him. I've got to really. We're playing 50cc. I basically don't power slide just to give him a chance of not coming last, and I just act as protection. And it's really tough, man. Oh, it's not that fun. It is because you're playing video games, but yeah.
I know what you mean. We're so far off the beaten track here, but I on my retro kind of gaming setup in the lounge room, I introduced my now almost 5-year-old to Game Boy Pokemon. So we loaded up some Pokemon Emerald on there, and I was like, nice. All right, here we go, buddy. There's half an hour till dinner. We're going to do this. And it was great, except trying to explain to him, it's hey, if you skip all of the prompts, he's pretty good at reading. He can pretty much read most of the text that's on there, but he's just skip.
Yeah.
And he's like, Dad, what? I can't find what to do. And I'm like, oh,
yeah,
we're going to pick this back up on the weekend.
My son, he calls it Pokemon. Oh, let's play some Pokemon. And I say, buddy, it's not fun really for 2 people to play that game.
No.
What's the one that came out? What's the latest one? because anyways, it was 3D. It was awesome. I really liked it. It's the only time I ever play video games is like, I'm 37 years old. So it's like, I was there at the time, man. Like it's,
Yeah.
But, he wants to play it. He wants to play Pokemon, but because he can't read, he kind of doesn't really understand it just yet. So, couple more years.
It's a tough game.
Yeah. That's what's harder, learning MIDI as an adult or learning Pokemon as a 5-year-old.
Yeah. Well, I had to play
Hats off to the most
as well.
That is the segue of all time, kind of getting us back on track.
Yeah,
He's a
that was
professional,
very
this guy.
well done. Very well done.
Well, what was the what's
You got
what's
the
coming
other.
next?
You got the other one after the arrow there on the desk.
Not built.
No. All right.
No.
Cool.
What's coming next?
We've got a click.
I'll think on
We've
this.
got a click, which is a relay interface. So
Okay.
a manual relay for switching other stuff that doesn't have MIDI, but you can control the relay with MIDI, which then switches whatever.
Which is awesome.
So we've got that at the moment. Click V2 is going to have a second jack as well as the relays to send out analog expression.
So you'd be able
for
to
those-
go MIDI expression to analog expression.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So the click's actually it's kind of
Or
a
MIDI knob to analog expression.
Yeah, it's a USB MIDI interface. You get MIDI out, MIDI in, with kind of through, and then relay out and expression out. And the idea is it's the box that interfaces your non-MIDI things. It's the friend of your more basic kind of, your basic gear.
That's amazing.
Grandpa gear.
That's cool. The grandpa gear. Yeah, we've got We've got that.
So they're two that they'll be our next releases.
You guys also have like a loop switcher.
We do. Thank you. I was trying to think of it. Yeah. So the micro loop, we discontinued the first version of that, almost a year ago now. And it was a purely relay based switcher. We've been very hard at work for at least the last 12 months, probably 18 months, on a sort of a successor to that, which is getting very close to kind of being able to publicly show.
Very cool.
But it is also, you get some relay switching up front for your impedance sensitive wah or fuzz. Then you get a audible parallel combo stereo mono, whatever you want, matrix looper after that.
Very cool.
Which is very nice. And it's also got built-in wireless connectivity, which isn't just going to be your Bluetooth or your Wi-Fi.
Cool.
There's some really, really cool kind of software accompaniment coming with that. So probably once the Air and the Click are out, hopefully before the end of the year, we're going to have that guy in the wild.
Fantastic.
Very cool.
That's amazing. Well, is there anything else before we wrap? Thank you guys so much for being so generous with your time and expertise today. Anything else you want to bring up quickly?
Well, no, I don't think so. Yeah, thanks very much for having us. It was great fun.
I already want to do a part 2 with you guys because I feel like we could really actually get into the MIDI, like cool stuff you can do with MIDI at some point. That would be really interesting.
100%.
That'd be great. Yeah. You save up, kind of all the MIDI related questions that you get from students or whatnot. It's just like, hey, let's.
And also, I guess if
comments
people
too.
are watching this in the comments, let us know all your arcane MIDI questions, and we'll do a second part where we can just throw it out to Simon and Sam. And also, I'll put a link to the website, and Simon, the book will be in there as well with a discount code. So yeah, what an absolute pleasure. And there'll be some content on my channel over the next couple of weeks with the bridge as well, because I'm currently in Sydney for the next 6 weeks, and I've got my FM3 here, and having like a MIDI controller that's a popular thing. People always ask me about, like, what small MIDI controller should I get that can also, the foot switches on that have a bunch of cool hold functions and things like that. So once you get out of that ecosystem, there's not a lot of products that, have the tap and hold and have the ramping and things like that.
Yeah.
So
what
I'm excited to try it.
platforms does this go on to? Because if there's people, with like questions in the comments or something, I'll try and, kind of check those out. So if people do have like MIDI related questions, I'm more than happy to kind
go up
of
on YouTube.
Get back to them in the comments. YouTube. Yep.
Yeah.
It'll be up on YouTube and all the other audio-based podcast apps as well.
Unreal.
So, awesome, guys. Thank you so much for your time.
that as well. And
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you
yeah.
very much.
That's amazing. I'll put all the relevant information in the video description, and I guess we'll see you all next time on the next episode of the Gear Podcast. Peace.
Bye.
Unreal. Bye.